I'll just go ahead and do it this way, and then I'll hand off the camera to see my lovely face. So first I'm going to pan over here to my participants for this speech. Hi guys, I appreciate you all for doing this. So now I'm going to hand off the camera to my lovely assistant. Go ahead. Okay. So this is for my critique speech for my communications or public speaking class with Dr. Myra Roberts. This is the first assignment for the critique speech for a movie worth 50 points. So we'll go ahead and get started. This is timed for 7 minutes, starting now. All right, so a movie, which we're critiquing today, is a multifaceted experience, right? Making a good movie is a remarkable feat of collaboration with multiple departments working together, like music, directing, acting, makeup, all of that stuff. So when a good movie comes along, that's actually pretty remarkable. Like, it's a good thing to really look at and analyze further. But first we have to ask ourselves, what makes a movie good? Who determines the metric behind a good quality movie and what that's about? That's a discussion for a completely other topic, but for now we're going to look at defining a good movie according to 3 different criteria, which is, first, is the plot engaging? Second, are the actors who play their parts believable? And third, does it have good artistic elements, so choreography, makeup, costumes, music, etc. The movie I'm going to be analyzing today, which I started with the camera panning over here, is the 2017 adaptation of the movie Wonder Woman, starring Gal Gadot and Chris Pine, and is directed by Patty Jenkins. By the end of this critique, we will be able to understand or determine whether or not Wonder Woman is classified as a good movie. So first of the 3 criteria we need to look at is the plot. Was the plot engaging? Before we can answer that, though, we need to talk about the context behind this movie, which is the character Wonder Woman. Wonder Woman is the alter ego for a character named Diana, who's an Amazon, which means she was half woman and half goddess or god, also considered a demigod. She's basically a superhero with supernatural strength, magical armor, and she kicks ass, and she's defeats bad guys, so that's cool. However, many people are cynical of the character of Wonder Woman, claiming that she's more of a sex object than a superhero, given the way she's been communicated in comic books, etc., as being basically not very hardcore in defeating bad guys, and she's just there to look good and look pretty in a less than modest costume, right? So for a movie maker to be brave enough to address this topic, they have to look at both of those elements first before they can really engage in a plot and decide whether or not it's a story worth telling. Fortunately for this movie with Wonder Woman, they did a good job at addressing both of those points, what I mentioned being her physique and her costume or her armor. In the movie, they talk about her physique as being the result of a lot of physical duress or working out a lot. She basically trained for 20 years to be a warrior. And then her armor is considered more utilitarian, having more Greek origins. So there's a lot of symbolism and meaning behind what goes on with her costume other than it just looks sexy or whatever you would want to call that. So with both of those being addressed, we can move forward and critique whether or not the movie had an engaging plot, which this movie does because it walks the fine line of empowering women without putting down men, which is actually a pretty rare combination in today's culture. It does this by showing Diana or Wonder Woman as the superhero who's hardcore in solving problems, involving supernatural strength, so like moving cars and flipping things over. But it also shows her as being more human because she doesn't quite understand a lot of mechanics or human emotional relationship patterns, which makes her seem naive and kind of sad, so that makes her a little bit more relatable. Conversely, you pair this with Steve Trevor, who is portrayed by Chris Pine. He is a character that is human, and through his humanity actually ends up becoming the hero because he's willing to do what Diana cannot, which is sacrifice his life for her safety and for that of their friends and their mission. So it does well to communicate both men and women can be superheroes in a superhero movie, even if one doesn't have supernatural strength. So piggybacking off of our good plot, we're going to number 2, which is the acting. Good actors are good at their job when they make you forget that they're A-list actors, right? They are so engrossing in their characters that you believe them as actually the character and not the star that they are going into the movie. That's a pretty mighty task for this specific movie, given the roll call. We've got Gal Gadot, Chris Pine, and Robin Wright playing various characters. Gal Gadot has been recently pushed into the public eye through her starring in the Fast and Furious franchise, which is a multi-million-dollar franchise. We've got Chris Pine, who has an extensive filmography covering Into the Woods and the J.J. Abrams reboot of Star Trek. And then we've got Robin Wright, who has had a very illustrious career, spanning a few decades, starting from The Princess Bride, Forrest Gump, and then Netflix hit special House of Cards. So with a high-quality cast that we've got going on there, it's a pretty safe assumption that they're going to portray their characters as believable. Fortunately, this assumption is correct when you watch the movie, because they do a great job of portraying their characters in, organic interactions, and you forget throughout the movie that they're A-list actors. One of the best examples of acting you can see in this movie is towards the end of the film. Diana, as portrayed by Gal Gadot, goes back to a village where she had previously saved the inhabitants from the bad guys, only to find out when she goes back that they've all been murdered. In that scene, she falls to the ground, hits her knees, and cries out in both rage and sorrow. And that moment is really great because it connects with the audience and really crystallizes the cost of war and the importance of Diana completing her mission and basically beating the bad guys. So with both of those elements addressed, we're going to move to the third one, which is the other artistic elements that feed into the previous two, trying to decide whether or not that was well conveyed in this movie. There are many to consider, all of which were good: the choreography, the costumes, the makeup, etc. But the one we're going to look at today is the music. The composer for the score for this movie was Rupert Gregson Williams. According to IMDb, he has been tagged in collaboration and composing other high-profile projects, such as the soundtrack for The Crown, Hacksaw Ridge, and Aquaman. With knowing he's a good composer, we also know then that he's going to do a good job of making music that connects with the audience emotionally, and we can see that throughout the film, especially in the previous scene that I had mentioned when Diana goes back to the village and finds the inhabitants have all been murdered. As powerful as the acting was to communicate the emotion in that scene, it was really the music that kind of punctuated it and brought it all together. When I first viewed it in theaters, I and other audience members, upon seeing that scene, were brought to tears because the music at that moment was so powerful. And every time I listen to that soundtrack since then or watch that movie, when I hit that scene, it still produces an emotional response within me. So that's a good indicator that it's got good quality. So in conclusion, this movie was not only enjoyable, as evidenced by the fact that it grossed over $412 million according to Rotten Tomatoes, but it's also a good quality movie because it hits all of the 3 points that we had mentioned previously. It's got an engaging plot, the actors did well in making their characters believable, and it has good artistic elements, namely music. Now that you guys are armed with new guidelines as to what makes a movie good, hopefully the next time you sit down and you're watching a movie on the couch or you hit the movie theater, when you're watching this, you can ask yourself, what actually is a good movie?